I know I need not repeat here that Masao Miyoshi was a man of many talents. Photographer, calligrapher, visual artist, writer, international critic, professor, and scholar. But he was more than that. The part of him that I really appreciated was that he was an iconoclast, or as he himself said, an outsider who spoke up. He prided himself on being non-compliant, someone who did not stomach platitudes, a trait not always appreciated in our Department of Literature. The fawning and the feint did not fare well before him either. A former Japanese graduate student that we shared once told me that Masao was a high-level samurai. His sword, however, was his pen, his writing. His tongue, too, was no dull blade. When Masao joined the Lit department, we were not immediately BFF. Let's say we moved in different circles. I came to appreciate Masao when I began reading his work. On graduate committees, we more often than not disagreed. But he, Don Wayne, and I had, I think, a special understanding, despite, or even I now realize, precisely because of our disagreements. One day, after a particularly horrid departmental meeting, I recall his then wife, Marty, called me and said that Masao was very upset and would I please call him. I did call him that night, of course, and after that, I came to see that we were, in some sense, allies, in other words, friends. After Marty died, Masao took it very hard and came to look totally exhausted and frail. He lost a lot of weight. Months later, however, Beatrice and I came to see another side of Masao. His health was better, and he reported one day that there were no fewer than 3 women interested in him. And they all lived outside of San Diego. Masao had become the eligible bachelor, and he was having a hard time deciding on one of the 3. Months later, he called to say he had gotten married, and he invited Beatrice, Lucinda, and me to meet Lindsley at his house. We saw a transformed Masao. He was a happy, elegant, engaged, and engaging man again. A few months later, after we had dinner at one of his favorite Chinese restaurants, not too far from his house, he and Lindsley arrived on foot, using matching silver-tipped walking sticks picked up on a trip to London. A dapper man out for an evening stroll. Masao was happy again. A year or so later, Lucinda, Beatrice, and I again were in Del Mar, this time accompanying him and Lindsley to the oncologist. In the end, too, even if frail, he did things his way and exited on his own terms. We miss Masao, but as the topics of this conference prove, he has left us a good bit of writing to think about. I think he would have liked that. In his later writing, Masao is highly critical of identity politics and identity studies. Once when we took a visiting Jameson to dinner at his favorite Chinese restaurant, the subject of race and ethnicity was broached at the table. And I forget what Masao said, but I disagreed. Fred told me as we were leaving that I should talk to Masao about race. We never did have that conversation in a sustained fashion, but in a way I'm having it today as I look briefly at his work on the trajectory of the university as a capitalist enterprise. Masao knew full well that race and ethnicity as markers of social and class hierarchies play a role in the makeup and configuration of both students and faculty at increasingly privatized public institutions of higher learning. Early on, Masao saw the danger in the appropriation of higher education by the market, as he notes in literary elaborations. He saw that, quote, academic endeavors are often placed under heavy pressure by special interest, unquote, with disastrous consequences for society. In his essay on Ivory Tower in Escrow, Masao is even more explicit, noting that the privatization of education through private funding in the form of grants and endowments now determines research objectives and programs and consequently the character of education offered. Masao saw too that administrators focus increasingly on development, what he most aptly called industrial utility. As he explains, university presidents and chancellors that simultaneously sit on the boards of numerous corporations function more as CEOs than as academic scholars and leaders, never want to beat around the bush. Masao gives a number of pertinent examples, including that of our own former UCSD Chancellor and UC President Robert Dines. The current cohort of extremely highly paid university administrators coming from the private sector brings, as Bob Samuels also puts it, a purely corporate mentality that is in conflict with the stated mission of educational institutions. As we all can or should see today, the threat of the wholesale privatization of the university is imminent, although, as is equally evident, the university has in manifold ways long been privatized. As Masao again points out in the Ivory Tower in Escrow, corporations profiting from university research are often multinational conglomerates, like the Switzerland-based Sandoz Biotechnology Corporation. Corporate interests have not only led to the entrepreneurial transformations of the university and its research agenda, but they affect curriculum as well. Those departments that do not generate grants and outside funding, like our lit department, are often discontinued. Thus, while state funding decreases for higher education and leads to hikes in tuition and disestablished programs, budgetary gains from private funding continue to increase yearly. New departments created on campuses are those oriented towards programs that produce products that can be patented and yield tangible rewards. Along with these new university private sector programs comes an increase too in the number of university administrators, associate and assistant chancellors, all heavily focused on revenue enhancement, fundraising, and high-tech research activities on and off campuses. Maybe I should say, and deans. The common good, the lofty goals of accessible higher education fall by the wayside. Profit is the name of the game. For that reason, universities seek other avenues to make money and increase efficiencies in product delivery, that is, in what used to be known as teaching. Many universities have launched virtual university programs and are now offering undergraduate classes online and promoting distance learner as the future of education. Clearly, the university is now more interested in revenue-producing activities, be it online instruction, distance learning, financial rewards from inventions and patents, or private funding, than in education as a public service. Administrators in lockstep repeat their chorus of, "There is no alternative." California's much-touted master plan of providing the state's residents high-quality and low-cost access to education is now a thing of the past. A university education is now a consumer good that only the wealthy can afford, or perhaps even more disturbing, one made available to those students willing to take out private, not government-issued, student loans that often charge interest rates of 6% or higher. Even these loans play in a twisted way into the university's ability to borrow money at reduced rates. Samuels also finds that student tuition and fees are used by UC as collateral for construction bonds totaling billions that UC needs to build not teaching facilities, but high-tech research venues. When one looks closely at instructional costs for students and what students pay in tuition and fees, as Samuels has done at UCLA, then it appears that most of the money coming from students and the state is in fact not going for undergraduate instruction, but for sponsored research, graduate education, administration, and extracurricular activities. The Ivory Tower in Escrow, indeed, Massao's critical instincts, as usual, were here keen and on target. If the overriding objective of what we should perhaps call education enterprises is revenue enhancement, the implications are nothing short of disastrous for working class and ethnic minority populations. Excuse me. Especially if one considers the widening wealth gap between whites and minorities. A college-university education is becoming a luxury available only to those who can afford it. The promise of financial aid and Pell Grants from the federal government nowhere near begins to meet the costs. It seems that this dismal picture couldn't get any worse, but it does, unfortunately. The problem is that today, this process of privatization extends to every level of education, that is, to the K-12 system as well. For education has become an area for investment and profit-making. As noted by Foster, and in line with Harvey's notion of capital's addiction to fixes, education is now being viewed in financial circles as an unexploited market opportunity. The existence of a private education industry that is calling for a further opening up of a multi-trillion-dollar global public education market to capital accumulation is alarming, to put it mildly. While education has always served the interest of capital, developing a disciplined and compliant workforce for industry and for an increasingly highly technological world, what is now occurring is the commodification of instruction itself and restructuring of public education along an industrial model. When Bush unveiled his No Child Left Behind program, he was in fact opening the door to the educational market by requiring the testing of students in every state for proficiency in reading and math. Schools were to be assessed for adequate yearly progress. Those not achieving progress would be subject to corrective action, that is, required changes in staff, curriculum, and the like. Reforms orchestrated by philanthropic foundations like the Gates Foundation, the Walton Foundation, the Broad Foundation, and the Dell Foundation. No progress would lead to handing over control of the school to private management, converting the school to a charter school, replacing the staff, or other major restructuring. This No Child Left Behind program propitiated and in fact encouraged the privatization of public education, the elimination of unionized teachers, the bureaucratization of schools, and especially the marketing of educational technology, hardware, and software, testing systems, and instructional content materials. Education has become a domestic business opportunity in the K-12 market with billions of dollars at stake for a number of companies profiting from this restructuring, including companies like Apple, Dell, IBM, Hewlett-Packard, Compaq, Palm, Texas Instruments, Harcourt, McGraw-Hill, Thomson, and many others. This neoliberal assault on education is affecting the U.S. educational system and especially poor minority and working class students who, as a rule, attend public schools. The commodification of education is perhaps nowhere clearer than in the adoption of the notion of value added to the educational process. Teachers are also under attack for not meeting accountability levels and evaluated in terms of questionable quantitative measures. Once the domain of markets and commodities that leave much to be desired as they take out of the calculus social factors that impinge upon both students' and teachers' performance. The litmus test of the degree of control exerted by capital on our entire educational system is perhaps precisely in the terms and language in which education is now discussed. Conservative corporate interests, state budgetary problems, and federal educational policies are thus coming together in a way that is pernicious to all, but particularly ethnic minority education consumers. That is, to us, especially to Latinos, Latinas, and African Americans. Masao, with his work on the privatization of institutions of higher education, went directly to the very heart of the problem with foresight and insight and without mincing words. Thanks, Masao. We would do well to continue in that vein.